The evening air felt heavier than usual when Claire stepped out of her townhouse. She was only planning to grab a package from the porch, but the moment she reached the walkway, she saw him standing there. Ethan, her neighbor's boy, quiet, thoughtful, maybe 16 or 17, with a calm way of watching the world. He wasn't the type to wander over without a reason. Claire had lived next door for 3 years and had barely heard him speak more than a polite hello. Tonight, though, something was different. He stood at the edge of her path as if he had been waiting for her. She slowed, unsure why her heart suddenly picked up. Maybe it was the look on his face, soft, almost worried. "Hey," Claire said gently. "Everything okay?" He nodded, but not convincingly. His eyes darted toward his house, then back to her. He looked like someone trying to form a sentence and losing the words halfway. Claire stepped a little closer, keeping her voice low. His silence wasn't rude. It felt more like he was carrying something heavy and didn't know how to set it down. "You need something?" she asked. Ethan swallowed. Then he spoke, barely above a whisper. Can you stay outside for a minute?" The request startled her. It wasn't loud or urgent, but it had weight, like he was saying much more than those few words. Claire followed his gaze again. His house looked normal from the outside. Lights on, curtains half drawn, a calm suburban evening. But Ethan still looked uneasy. "Is something wrong in there?" she asked softly. He hesitated. His fingers fidgeted at the hem of his hoodie. He shook his head, then nodded, then sighed like he wished he could explain, but didn't know how. Claire felt a small tug in her chest. Ethan had always carried a quiet sadness around him. He wasn't mistreated, at least not that she had ever seen, but he always seemed like a boy who lived with too many unspoken thoughts. She glanced at her porch light, at the quiet street, at the shadows stretching across the lawns. "Okay," she said gently. "I can stay for a moment." His shoulders relaxed in a way that broke her heart a little. He wasn't asking for much, just someone to stand there so he didn't feel alone. They stood side by side, not touching, not talking. Only the sound of distant traffic and a dog barking down the block. After a long stretch of quiet, Ethan finally spoke again. "My dad's in a mood," he whispered. Claire knew what that meant. She had never seen the man lash out physically, but she had heard the tone before. Sharp, cutting, impatient. Words that bruised even when they didn't leave marks. "Did he say something to you?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "I just didn't want to be inside right now." Claire nodded slowly. She understood. Sometimes spaces were louder than voices. "You're always welcome to stand here," she said gently. He gave a small smile. Barely there, but real. "And thank you," he whispered. Claire felt something shift in the moment. Not romantic, he was just a teenager, but deeply human. A quiet trust he rarely gave anyone. Then the porch light next door flicked on. Ethan stiffened instantly. Claire saw the tension crawl across his shoulders. He took a small step back, eyes dropping to the ground. "I should go," he murmured. But the way he said it didn't sound like a choice. Claire touched her porch railing, steadying herself as a strange, protective ache settled in her chest. Before he turned, he looked up at her. For the first time, his eyes weren't guarded. They were pleading, almost afraid. "Please don't forget I asked," he whispered. "Just please don't." She didn't know what he meant. Not fully. But the way he said it made her breath catch. "I won't," she said softly. He nodded once, then walked back toward his house with slow, reluctant steps. Claire watched him disappear inside. The door closed behind him. The quiet street suddenly felt colder. And she had this sinking feeling that his soft request was only the beginning of something much heavier. A faint thud echoed from next door, then another. Claire froze, listening, heart tightening, unsure if Ethan was safe, unsure what he wanted her to remember or why it mattered so much. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. She took one step toward her fence, listening harder. Another sound. Quicker. And it made her stomach drop. She wasn't sure what waited on the other side of that wall, but she knew the night wasn't done with her yet. The moment Claire heard that sharp sound, something inside her tightened. It wasn't loud, but it carried a tension that didn't belong in a calm neighborhood evening. She stayed still for a moment, listening, waiting to hear if it came again. Nothing, only the wind brushing through the hedges. But the silence felt wrong now, too controlled, too heavy. Claire took a slow breath and stepped closer to the fence between their yards. She didn't want to pry. She didn't want to assume the worst, but Ethan's quiet plea kept replaying in her mind. Just please don't. Just please don't. Those words had come from a boy who rarely showed emotion. Tonight, he had looked like someone standing on the edge of something he didn't want to face alone. Claire stayed by the fence for another minute before she forced herself to move back inside her house. She didn't want to cause trouble with his father. She didn't want to escalate anything without knowing the truth. Inside, she locked her door and leaned against it. Her house felt too quiet now, the kind of quiet that made her thoughts louder. She walked into the living room and turned on the television. She wasn't even watching it. She just needed noise to stop the echo of that thud. For a long while, she sat on the edge of her couch, hands clasped together, unable to shake the image of Ethan's worried eyes. When the clock struck 9, she didn't need to read the numbers to sense it. She finally stood and paced toward the window overlooking the yards. The light in Ethan's house had changed. The living room glow was still on, but the hallway light had gone dark. She watched the house for a moment, hoping maybe she'd catch a glimpse of him. She didn't. Instead, something surprising happened. Her phone buzzed. Claire frowned. Hardly anyone texted her that late. She picked it up and saw an unknown number. For a second, she considered ignoring it. Then she opened it. "Are you still up?" Her heart thumped. She typed back slowly. "Who is this?" Then, the reply, "It's Ethan." Her breath hitched in her throat. She didn't remember giving him her number. Maybe his mother had it from neighborhood gatherings. Maybe he'd saved it long ago and never used it. Either way, he had reached out. "Yes," she typed. "I'm awake. Is everything okay?" The 3 little dots blinked for a long time. Too long. Then, "Can you come outside again for a minute? Not to talk, just be out there." Claire stared at the message, unsure if she should feel honored or alarmed. He wasn't a little kid. He wasn't asking for something outrageous. He just wanted presence. Something was happening in that house. Something silent. Something he didn't have the words for. She grabbed her sweater and stepped back outside. The evening felt colder now, sharper. The porch light from next door was still on. Claire walked to the edge of her driveway and waited. She didn't call his name. She didn't text again. A few seconds later, the door next door cracked open. Ethan slipped out quietly and stepped onto the porch. He didn't fully come over. He stayed in the narrow patch of light, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Claire gave him a small nod, letting him know she was there. He exhaled shakily, like that alone made the air easier for him. "You all right?" Claire whispered. He nodded, but his eyes were glassy with something unsaid. "My dad's tired," he said softly. "That's all." The way he said it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a careful explanation he'd learned to give over the years. "Do you want to come stand on my side for a little bit?" she asked gently. His eyes darted back to the door behind him. Fear flickered there, not terror, just the fear of being a disappointment, of being found somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. "I can't," he whispered. She didn't push further. They stood there, separated by a stretch of driveway and a few feet of cool air, but somehow sharing the same heavy moment. When a car drove by, Ethan flinched. Not visibly, but Claire saw the small twitch in his shoulders. He looked exhausted, like a boy carrying years of quiet strain. "What did you mean earlier?" Claire asked softly. "When you told me not to forget that you asked?" He looked down at his shoes. "It's stupid," he whispered. "You'll think it's dumb." "I won't." Another pause. He lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting hers in a fragile moment of honesty. "I just needed someone to see me tonight," he said. "Someone who didn't yell, someone who wasn't angry. That's all. I don't want to disappear in my own house." The words hit her like a weight. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just true. Before she could respond, the porch light behind him flicked off. Ethan stiffened instantly. "That's my dad," he whispered. "I have to go." He turned quickly, but before stepping inside, he looked at her again with quiet desperation. "Please, don't go inside yet," he murmured. "Just for a few minutes. It helps." Then he vanished through the door. Claire stayed exactly where she was, not because he asked, but because something was unfolding that she couldn't ignore anymore. And she had the strange, sinking feeling that the small sounds she'd heard earlier were not random, not harmless. She waited in the cold, listening to the stillness of the night, wondering what happened behind that closed door. Wondering why Ethan needed her there, and what he was afraid might happen if she walked away. The next morning, Claire woke to sunlight spilling across her living room. The night's events still lingered in her chest, a tight knot of concern she couldn't shake. She moved through her kitchen slowly, making coffee while thinking about Ethan. She hadn't expected him to reach out like that, and yet she couldn't stop replaying his words. Someone who didn't yell, someone who wasn't angry. She poured her coffee and sat by the window, glancing at the house next door. It looked normal in the bright morning light. Nothing seemed out of place. But she knew better now. She had seen the shadow behind his eyes, and she had heard the weight in his soft voice. After finishing her coffee, she decided she couldn't ignore it. She had to check on him somehow, without overstepping, without alarming his father. By mid-morning, the streets were alive with neighbors walking dogs, kids biking, and the distant hum of lawnmowers. Claire spotted Ethan outside, crouched near the driveway, tying his sneakers. He froze when he saw her watching. "Good morning," she called softly. He straightened, tucking the laces in, and gave a small nod. Claire took a step toward the fence separating their yards. "You look tired," she said gently. Not a question, just a statement. "Yeah, long night," he murmured. "Yeah, long night," he murmured. Claire understood immediately. Some nights left marks you couldn't see. You couldn't erase them with a few hours of sleep. "Do you want to talk?" she asked carefully. His hands clenched into fists for a moment, then relaxed. He looked at her with the faintest flicker of trust. Not much, but enough. I don't know, he admitted. It's easier when someone's nearby, even if they don't say anything. Claire smiled softly. It wasn't a cheerful smile. It was understanding. I can do that, she said. Stay nearby. He nodded, and for a few minutes, they simply existed in quiet proximity. The air between them carried no tension, only the gentle rhythm of someone being present. Then his phone buzzed. Ethan's eyes went wide, and he checked the screen quickly. A message from his father flashed, and his shoulders slumped. I need to go, he muttered. Claire didn't respond. She only nodded. He turned to leave, but paused. Thanks for last night, he said quietly. His voice held a fragility that made her chest ache. You're welcome, Claire replied softly. I'm glad you reached out. He glanced back once, then disappeared inside. Claire stayed by the fence for a long time after, wondering what kind of night he had endured. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't focus on anything else. Work emails, calls, even her own lunch felt hollow compared to the worry she carried. She wondered how a boy so young could shoulder so much alone. That evening, she heard a soft knock at her door. Startled, she wiped her hands on the towel and opened it. Ethan stood there, hoodie up, eyes flickering nervously. Hi, he said softly. Can I come out for a bit? Claire nodded without hesitation. Of course, she said. He stepped onto the porch, keeping a careful distance. The street was quiet now, the sun sinking low, casting long shadows across the pavement. I didn't want to be inside, he admitted. Not today. It's too much. Claire felt a pang of sadness. She wanted to say something comforting, but she also knew words might not be enough. Instead, she simply nodded and stood with him. Minutes passed. They didn't speak. The kind of silence that doesn't demand conversation. The kind that just lets someone exist without judgment. Finally, Ethan spoke, voice trembling slightly. My dad, he doesn't understand sometimes. He's tired, angry, I don't know. I just can't be in there when it gets like that. Claire's chest tightened. She wanted to promise him safety, but she couldn't. She could only be there. You're not alone, she whispered. You're not invisible. He looked at her then. Really looked. Eyes wide, uncertain, yet trusting in a way that made her heart ache. I just needed someone, he murmured. That's all. Someone who doesn't yell. Someone who listens. Claire's eyes softened. I'm here, she said simply. He exhaled slowly, a small weight lifting from his shoulders. For a moment, the fear and tension in his body softened. He seemed almost lighter. But then, the front door of his house creaked open. He froze instantly, shoulders stiffening. I should go, he whispered. Claire didn't move. She only nodded. He looked at her, eyes pleading silently, then slipped back inside. Claire stayed on the porch long after he disappeared. The evening was falling fast, shadows stretching across the yard. The air felt colder, emptier, like something was waiting unseen. And deep down, she knew tonight was only the beginning. The silent weight Ethan carried wouldn't vanish overnight. But she also knew one thing clearly: he had chosen to let her see it. And that choice meant everything. The days that followed were quiet, almost routine. Claire and Ethan exchanged small nods in passing, brief smiles across driveways, and occasional polite hellos. Nothing dramatic, nothing that drew attention. But behind that normalcy, something unspoken lingered. The memory of late-night whispers and shadowed eyes didn't fade. Ethan's fragile trust felt like a thread Claire didn't want to break. One Thursday evening, around 6:30 p.m., Claire noticed movement at the edge of her yard. It was Ethan, pacing near the fence, hoodie up, hands stuffed into pockets. He seemed restless, anxious. "Hey, are you okay?" He froze, then took a hesitant step closer. I needed to see someone," he admitted softly. "Just someone who's not angry." Claire felt her chest tighten. She had seen this in him before, the silent panic of being trapped in a space where voices could hurt. "You don't have to say anything," she replied gently. "You can just be." Ethan's shoulders eased slightly, like her words were a small shield. He didn't come closer, but he didn't retreat either. "I didn't sleep well last night," he said after a pause. "Too much yelling, too many words I don't understand. I just needed the air." Claire nodded, understanding more than he could know. Some battles were fought in silence, and sometimes presence was the only kind of support that mattered. They stood side by side, separated by a few feet, and watched the sky darken to shades of violet and deep blue. The streetlights flickered on, casting long patterns across the sidewalks. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, "for being weird, for asking you to stand there. I don't mean to bother anyone." "You're not bothering anyone," Claire said firmly. "You're not a burden." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, something fragile passed between them, a sense of understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of trust. "I don't have anyone who listens," he whispered. "Not really. Not like this." Claire's heart ached. She wanted to reach out, to make him feel safe, to tell him he wasn't alone. But she also knew that pushing too far could break the trust he'd slowly placed in her. Instead, she nodded and simply stood there. Minutes passed. The quiet stretched comfortably around them until the faint sound of footsteps inside his house made him stiffen. "My dad," he muttered. "I should go." Claire didn't stop him. She only said softly, "You're not invisible. Remember that." He nodded once, small and uncertain, then turned and slipped back inside. The door closed softly behind him. Claire stayed on her porch long after he disappeared. The sky was nearly black now, and the air carried the faint chill of approaching night. Her mind replayed every soft word, every hesitant glance. It wasn't just concern anymore. It was something deeper. A realization that connection, real human connection, was rare, and she had been allowed to share it with someone who needed it desperately. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Ethan would step outside around the same time, often after dinner, and Claire would be there. They didn't always speak. Sometimes it was enough to simply exist in each other's presence, a shared understanding that words weren't necessary. One rainy evening, Claire noticed Ethan hesitating by his front door. The storm had started suddenly, drops splattering on the pavement, wind stirring the leaves. He looked uncertain, almost frozen. "Do you want to come to my porch?" she asked. "Just until the rain stops. You don't have to say a word." He glanced at the downpour, then back at her. "Okay," he whispered. He stepped lightly across the yard, careful not to slip. Claire handed him a small towel to dry off, and they stood side by side, listening to the rain tap against the roof. For the first time, he didn't look tense. Not fully. The storm outside seemed to match the quiet calm that had finally settled between them. "You know," he said softly, almost to himself, "I don't get many chances to just be calm." Claire nodded, understanding completely. "Sometimes that's all we need," she said. "Just a moment of calm." He leaned slightly against the railing, eyes on the wet street, and Claire felt a wave of protectiveness she hadn't expected. This boy carried more weight than anyone should, and somehow he had trusted her enough to let her share it. The rain slowed, turning into a gentle drizzle, and for a few minutes, the world outside seemed suspended. No shouting, no fear, no anger, just two people existing quietly in the same space. Then, without warning, the door behind him opened. A shadow appeared, a figure, authoritative, moving quickly toward him. Ethan's eyes widened. He stiffened, and Claire felt that same familiar knot of fear tighten in her chest. He looked at her, silent, eyes wide with a question he didn't speak aloud, and she knew, somehow, she couldn't leave him alone right now. Claire's heart raced as she saw the shadow move closer. It was his father, backlit by the porch light, his steps purposeful and quick. Ethan froze, caught between fear and hesitation. Claire stepped forward, her voice steady but soft. "Mr. Dalton, it's okay. He's just drying off from the rain." His father paused mid-step, eyes narrowing at Claire, then at Ethan. There was a tension in the air, the kind that made small movements feel monumental. Ethan's hands clenched the railing, knuckles white. Claire noticed the slight tremor in his shoulders, the way he leaned instinctively toward her, like looking for protection. The man's gaze softened, just slightly, when he looked at Ethan, but the stern edge remained. Claire realized this wasn't a confrontation. It was a moment of reckoning. He shouldn't be out in the rain," his father said, voice clipped. "He needed a moment," Claire said gently, "a small one, just to breathe." Ethan looked at her, eyes wide. He hadn't spoken, but that glance carried everything: relief, gratitude, and a flicker of hope. For a long beat, the father studied the boy, then finally exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, "but only for a few minutes, then come inside." Ethan nodded rapidly. Claire gave him a reassuring smile, and he leaned slightly against the railing again, calmer now. They stood in quiet, watching the rain taper off. Claire felt an unusual serenity settle around them, like the storm had passed not only outside, but within their tiny shared space. "You know," Ethan whispered, voice low, "I don't usually get this. A chance to just be outside, to not feel trapped." Claire nodded. "I know," she said softly. "And it's okay to need that. You're allowed." He looked at her then, his expression tentative. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for standing there, for letting me just be." The words were quiet, almost fragile, but they carried a weight that left Claire's chest tight. He didn't need to explain the details of his life. She already understood through the small, silent ways he asked for presence. Minutes passed. The rain became a soft drizzle, the street glistening under the fading light. Ethan's father stepped back inside, leaving the porch quiet once more. He turned to her, hesitating. Claire could see the conflict in his eyes, the wish to speak, and the fear of what might come. I feel like I can breathe sometimes," he said softly. "Just standing here, with someone who understands. Claire smiled gently, letting her voice be calm, comforting. You're not alone. You don't have to face it all by yourself. A small, genuine smile broke across his face. It was fleeting, but enough to show a boy beginning to trust again. They stayed like that for a while. The quiet of the street around them, the dim light of the porch casting soft shadows. No words were necessary. Sometimes, silence spoke louder than any conversation. Eventually, Ethan's gaze flicked toward the door. Time to go inside. Claire nodded, understanding. You know I'll be here, she said softly, whenever you need a moment. He nodded back, then turned and slipped inside. The door closed behind him, but the feeling lingered, a sense of fragile connection, of trust earned slowly, quietly, through small acts and silent understanding. Claire stayed on her porch long after he had gone. The night was calm now, the rain a distant whisper. Somewhere inside, she knew things weren't perfect. They never would be. But for the first time, she saw hope in Ethan's eyes, a glimmer that maybe, just maybe, someone noticing him, someone listening, could make the heaviest nights feel lighter. And Claire realized something important. It wasn't about solving everything. It was about being present, being patient, and giving someone the chance to be seen. Tonight had been one of those nights, a silent exchange of trust, a fragile bond forming in the quiet moments between fear and relief. Ethan's soft glance, the hesitant smile, and the simple words of thanks replayed in her mind. She knew this connection would linger, unspoken but strong. The street outside was empty now. The porch light dimmed to a warm glow. Claire breathed deeply, letting the quiet fill her chest. There was no dramatic closure, no grand gestures, just the small, meaningful truth of being there for someone who needed it. And for Claire, that was enough. The night held them both in a gentle pause, a reminder that sometimes the quietest moments were the most profound.